The rain-slicked streets of the city gleamed like oil under the jaundiced glow of the streetlights. For Leo, it was a hunting ground. He leaned against his unremarkable sedan, the picture of a man waiting for a ride, but his eyes were constantly moving, scanning, assessing. They were cold, calculating eyes, the kind that saw people not as souls, but as opportunities. He specialized in a certain type, vulnerable, isolated, easy, and he had just found her. She emerged from the dim mouth of a used bookstore, a solitary figure clutching a bag of books to her chest. She was pale, almost luminous against the grimy backdrop of the city, with a cascade of dark hair that seemed to drink the light. Her clothes were elegant but simple, and she moved with a quiet grace that spoke of someone trying not to be noticed. To Leo, she was a painting of perfect vulnerability. He watched her hesitate under the bookstore's awning, looking up at the weeping sky with a slight, resigned sigh. No car, no umbrella, no phone in her hand to call for rescue. Perfect, he thought, a familiar thrill coiling in his gut. She was exactly his type, the kind of woman who would be reported missing days from now. With no strong connections to raise an immediate alarm, a ghost before she even was one. He pushed off from his car, a plan already fully formed in his mind. A kind smile, a concerned offer of a ride she couldn't refuse, the first step in a well-rehearsed dance. As he moved toward her, he noted the delicate line of her throat, the faint blue tracery of veins visible against her alabaster skin. He imagined how easily it would bruise. He was so focused on the hunt, on the fantasy of domination, that he missed the signs a different kind of hunter would have recognized. He didn't see how her stillness was not one of fear, but of absolute patience. He didn't notice that her reflection in the rain-streaked bookstore window was curiously faint, a wavering smudge of color. And as a stray dog across the street let out a low whine and slunk into an alley, he dismissed it as nothing. Leo closed the distance, his smile a practiced mask of harmless concern. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dripping with feigned warmth. "It's really coming down. Can I offer you a ride somewhere?" The woman turned her head slowly. Her eyes were the color of ancient dark wine, and they held his without a flicker of surprise or fear. A small, enigmatic smile touched her lips. "That's very kind of you," she said, her voice a soft melody that belied the storm. "I am quite alone tonight." Leo's confidence swelled. Easy prey. He never stopped to consider that the gleam in her deep red-tinged eyes was not one of gratitude, but of a long-anticipated hunger finally being sated. He had seen a lamb, was looking at a wolf. And the hunt, he was blissfully unaware, had already begun. Leo's offer hung in the damp air between them, a hook baited with false chivalry. The woman who called herself Serafina regarded him with an unnerving stillness. Her acceptance was a soft murmur, almost lost in the patter of the rain. She slid into the passenger seat of his car, the scent of old books and cold night-blooming flowers filling the enclosed space. As Leo navigated the slick streets, he wove his web of lies. He spoke of being new to the city, a digital nomad seeking connection, his words designed to paint him as harmless and slightly lost. He asked her about her life, probing for weaknesses, for the lonely gaps he could exploit. Seraphine's answers were vague, layered with a melancholy that Leo mistook for isolation. She spoke of outliving her family, of long nights, of a quiet existence on the city's periphery. Each word was a carefully placed thread, tightening the illusion that she was the perfect victim. He was so engrossed in his performance, in the fantasy of the terror he would soon inflict, that he remained blind to the dissonance around him. He didn't question how she directed him through a maze of crumbling side streets with an ancient certainty. He didn't notice that the rain seemed to avoid her window, or that the frantic, neon-lit life of the city faded into a profound and watchful silence the deeper they drove. His focus was on the pulse beating at the base of her throat, a tiny rhythmic flutter that captivated him. He imagined the hot, metallic taste of it, the warmth of her life spilling over his hands. The thought was a dark, intoxicating promise that made his own blood sing with anticipation. He was the spider, and she was the fly, willingly entering his parlor. He never considered that the hunger he felt was a pale, pathetic echo of the one sitting beside him. He didn't see the way her eyes, in the fleeting glare of a passing headlight, reflected the light not with a tapetum lucidum's shine, but with the flat, absolute darkness of a starless midnight sky. The car, which he believed was his cage for her, was merely her chosen conveyance, delivering a different kind of predator to a very different kind of lair. The chance encounter was his fantasy, but the hunt, the true ancient hunt, was hers. The car slid to a final stop, not at a sleek apartment complex or a bustling dormitory, but before the retired gates of a cemetery. Beyond them, a private access road wound into a sea of weathered headstones and grand crumbling mausoleums. Nestled against the far wall, shrouded by skeletal ancient oaks, stood a structure that was less a house and more a part of the landscape itself. A caretaker's residence built from the same dark time, eaten stone as the monuments it watched over. Leo's mind, ever calculating, seized on the location. Isolated. Sound wouldn't travel. No close neighbors to notice a struggle or a scream was better than he could have possibly hoped for. A grim smile touched his lips. She didn't just live on the edge of society. She lived among the dead. The symbolism was almost too perfect. He saw it as the ultimate vulnerability, a testament to her loneliness. He never once considered it might be a statement of affinity. Serafina led him through the gates, which groaned with a sound of protest that seemed to vibrate in Leo's bones. The air within the cemetery walls was several degrees colder, tasting of damp earth, old stone, and a profound, chilling silence. No city sounds penetrated here. It was a pocket of absolute stillness, a kingdom of the departed, where she was the solitary ruler. His eyes traced the line of her neck as she walked ahead of him, her form a pale ghost against the darkness. The frantic, beautiful pulse was hidden now by her collar, but he could still feel its imagined rhythm thrumming in his own veins. He fantasized about the moment he would still it, about the stark crimson contrast against her marble skin. She was the perfect, isolated prey, delivered into his hands by a twist of fate he felt he had masterfully engineered. He was so blinded by his own violent intent that he failed to recognize the nature of the silence around him. It wasn't the silence of absence, but of watchfulness. From the shadows of a grand angel statue, the glint of too many eyes watched him pass. A faint bestial sniffing came from a thicket of thorny bushes, followed by a low, guttural sound of acknowledgement. These were not the sounds of the cemetery's usual inhabitants. They were the sounds of a court acknowledging its queen returning with a guest for dinner. Leo, believing himself the apex predator, had just willingly walked into the heart of her territory, and the very shadows were salivating. The heavy oak door of the stone house closed behind them with a sound like a tomb ceiling shut. Inside, the air was still and cool, carrying the faint, sweet scent of dried herbs and old parchment. The interior was a paradox parse and ancient, yet possessed of a severe, elegant order. There were no personal photographs, no colorful throws, nothing to suggest a life lived in the warm, messy way of mortals. Instead, tall candles cast long, dancing shadows across walls lined with books whose spines were cracked and faded with centuries. Leo's predatory instincts, honed in messy apartments and dark alleyways, were momentarily disarmed by the monastic stillness. This was not the environment of a vulnerable woman. It was a sanctum. Yet his arrogance quickly reshaped the evidence to fit his narrative. He saw the isolation not as power, but as a deeper level of defenselessness. Her quiet grace became a symptom of a spirit already broken by the world. Serafina moved through the room with a ritualistic precision, lighting a few more candles with a long, tapered match. Her movements were economical, devoid of the nervous flutter he was accustomed to seeing in his victims. She was setting a stage, and he, oblivious, believed he was the director. She offered him a glass of deep red wine, its color unsettlingly vivid in the dim light. As he took the glass, their fingers brushed. Her skin was cold, a shocking, marble-like chill that made the blood pulse hotter in his own hand. He dismissed it. She was just anxious, her circulation fleeing to her core. A classic fear response. He took a slow sip, the wine rich and coppery on his tongue, and felt a surge of invincibility. The game was proceeding exactly as he had planned. He began to lay his own traps, subtle manipulations designed to test her boundaries and reinforce his control. He stood a little too close, let his gaze linger a little too long. He spoke in a low, intimate tone, weaving a web of false empathy. He was establishing the rules of his hunt. He was the aggressor, the one who dictated the pace and the outcome. He was so intent on enforcing his own predatory rules that he failed to notice the ones already governing the space. The way the candlelight deliberately avoided illuminating the room's darkest corners. The way the shadows themselves seemed to shift and congeal with a sentient weight. He was playing a game of checkers on a board designed for a far more ancient and bloody sport, and his opponent had written the rules long before he was even a glimmer in his ancestor's eye. The wine, thick and strangely vitalizing, had warmed Leo's veins, fueling his audacity. He watched Serafina as she moved to a large, arched window, her silhouette a pale cutout against the night-blackened glass. The reflection showed nothing but the room behind her, a void where her form should have been. Leo's brain, fogged by arrogance and the peculiar wine, dismissed it as a trick of the light, a flaw in the old glass. He saw her stillness as an invitation in itself, a passive waiting. The final stage of his plan clicked into place. It was time to move from subtle intimidation to a promise of violence. He set his glass down with a deliberate click that echoed in the silent room. His voice was a low, practiced purr, designed to sound comforting while carrying the sharp edge of a threat beneath. He spoke of the house's isolation, pointing out how no one could hear a sound from within these thick stone walls. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her, and commented on her delicate strength, his words laced with the unspoken promise that it would not be enough. He was painting a picture of inescapable confinement, a cage of his own making. Serafina turned from the window. Her dark, wine-colored eyes held his, and for the first time he saw no fear in them. Instead, there was a glint of cold amusement, a predator's recognition of a lesser creature's posturing. She did not flinch from his looming presence. Instead, she gestured towards a narrow, descending staircase, tucked away in a corner of the room. Its entrance a dark maw, guarded by a rusted iron gate. Her voice, when it came, was a soft echo in the stillness. She invited him to see the true heart of her home, the crypts below. She spoke of ancient foundations and family history, her words a silken lure. To Leo, it was the ultimate validation, a darker, more soundproof place than even this room. Gravy wouldn't have to dig. The invitation was so perfect, so tailored to his monstrous intent, that it never occurred to him he was being herded. He was so focused on delivering the final bloody blow that he failed to see the cobra's coil before it struck. With a confident, sinister smile, he accepted. Stepping toward the staircase, descending willingly into the belly of the beast, the air that rose from the staircase was a physical presence. Carrying the scent of wet earth, cold stone, and the faint metallic thames of old iron, it was the breath of the grave. Leo hesitated for only a second, his animal instinct prickling in warning, but his hubris smothered the feeling. He saw it as the natural chill of an underground space, the perfect refrigeration for his impending crime. Serafina descended first, her movements fluid and soundless, a wisp of shadow drifting into the deeper dark. Leo followed, his own footsteps heavy and clumsy on the worn stone steps. The iron gate groaned shut behind him, not from any wind, but as if moved by an unseen hand. The sound was final, a verdict delivered. He was now severed from the world above. The crypt was vast, a subterranean cathedral supported by thick, rough-hewn pillars. His eyes, struggling to adjust, made out stone sarcophagi lining the walls, their lids carved with worn, impassive faces. In the center of the space, the floor was inlaid with a complex mosaic of a coiled serpent, its eyes chips of obsidian that seemed to watch their every move. The only light came from a single brazier burning with a low, blue-tinged flame that cast more shadows than illumination. This was no mere cellar. This was a throne room. The atmosphere was thick with age and a palpable waiting power. It was here, in the heart of her domain, that Leo's carefully constructed persona began to crack. The confidence that had fueled him upstairs felt thin and fragile, a cheap costume in the face of such ancient, somber grandeur. The pulse of excitement in his veins now felt more like a frantic, trapped fluttering. He was no longer the hunter in a victim's home. He was a guest who had overstayed his welcome in a place that had seen countless lives flicker and die. He had crossed the threshold, and the door to the world of the living was now closed. The door to her world was all that remained. The oppressive silence of the crypt was broken by a soft, skittering sound from the deepest shadows. Leo's head snapped toward the noise, his hunter's instincts finally screaming in earnest. For a fleeting moment, the dancing blue light from the brazier illuminated a shape that was not stone, It was a man, or something that had once been a man, crouched like a gargoyle atop a sarcophagus. His skin was stretched taut over sharp bone, and his eyes were milky orbs, blind yet fixed in Leo's direction. A low rattling hiss escaped its lips, revealing needle-like teeth. Leo recoiled, his heart hammering against his ribs. The wine-induced bravado evaporated, leaving a cold, sharp fear in its wake. He turned to Serafina, a question of pure terror forming on his lips, but the words died in his throat. She was changing. The delicate, melancholic facade she had worn like a shroud was melting away. In the eerie light, her posture straightened, radiating an ancient, terrible authority. Eyes, which he had thought were merely a dark brown, now glowed with the deep, infernal red of banked embers. The air around her seemed to warp, the shadows clinging to her form like a loyal court. This was no longer the vulnerable woman from the rainy street. This was something else entirely, something that had been playing a part for his benefit. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. The isolated prey, the perfect victim, it had all been a lie. He hadn't been the hunter leading a lamb to the slaughter. He'd been the lamb led by a wolf in sheep's clothing to a den of monsters. The game was not his, and the rules he thought he understood were a deadly fiction. The true horror was just beginning to unveil itself in the shadows. A primal, survivalist scream tore from Leo's throat, echoing grotesquely in the stone chamber. The last vestiges of his predatory persona shattered, replaced by raw, undiluted terror. He spun on his heel, scrambling back toward the staircase, his only thought to escape the nightmare he had so willingly entered. His heart was a frantic, caged bird beating against his ribs, but the iron gate at the top of the stairs was shut, a solid, unmovable barrier. From the shadows around it to more of the emaciated, hissing creatures emerged, their movements a fluid, unnatural creep. They did not advance to attack, but simply stood guard, cutting off his retreat. They were the sentinels of this tomb, and their mistress had given no order for his release. He turned back to Serafina, his back pressed against the cold stone of the wall. The plea for mercy died in his throat as he saw her fully. The genteel mask was entirely gone, replaced by a visage of terrifying beauty and absolute power. Her lips were pulled back from fangs that were not the neat. Pointed canines of legend, but sharp, bone-white daggers designed for tearing. A low, resonant growl vibrated from her chest, a sound that spoke of ages of hunger. This was the moment the trap closed. Every step the chance encounter in the rain, the story of loneliness, the invitation to her isolated home. The descent into the crypt had been a meticulously laid component of the snare. He had been so certain of his own cunning, so blind to the fact that he was not the architect of this evening, but its central, doomed participant. He had walked into the spider's parlor believing himself the spider. Only now, as the web ensnared him, did he understand the true scale of the predator he had challenged. The hunt was over. The culling was about to begin. The very atmosphere in the crypt thickened, growing heavy with a palpable, ancient energy that made the hair on Leo's arms stand on end. Blue-tinged flame in the brazier flared, casting frantic, leaping shadows that seemed to writhe in ecstasy. Serafina did not merely walk toward him. She moved with a liquid, impossible speed, a blur of pale skin, and dark hair that closed the distance between them in the space of a single, choked heartbeat. The commanding presence she now radiated was a physical force, pressing down on him, smothering his will to fight. It was the aura of a primordial predator, an energy that spoke of countless nights and countless lives ended. The pathetic struggles he had planned, the grabs, the punchers felt laughable now. His muscles turned to water, his body understanding the truth long before his mind could accept it. This was not a fight. It was a presentation of prey. He stumbled backward, his shoulder blades scraping against the rough-hewn wall. There was nowhere to go. The hissing creatures in the shadows edged closer, their milky eyes gleaming with a hungry anticipation. They were not there to harm him, he realized with dawning horror. They were there to witness, to see their mistress feed. The dynamic had irrevocably shattered and reformed. The power he had felt in the car, in the upstairs room, was exposed as a childish fantasy. The control he thought he wielded was nothing but a leash she had allowed him to hold, and now she had taken it back. The air itself was hers to command, and it held him fast, a specimen pinned for examination. The hunter was now utterly, terrifyingly aware that he was the only game in the room. The shift was complete, and the true nature of the night was laid bare in the crushing weight of her gaze. A final desperate surge of adrenaline screamed through Leo's veins. This was it. The moment he had fantasized about inflicting upon others, the raw struggle for life, the ultimate domination. But he was on the wrong side of the fantasy. With a guttural yell that was more terror than rage, he lunged, not at Serafina, but to the side, aiming to dash past her toward a patch of deeper shadow. It was a futile gesture. She moved with the casual, effortless speed of a predator intercepting stumbling prey. Her hand, cold and strong as iron, snapped out and caught his wrist. The bones ground together with a sickening promise of fracture. A sharp cry of pain was torn from him as she used his own momentum to slam him back against the stone wall. The impact drove the air from his lungs in a whoosh, and his vision swam with bursts of white light. Before he could even draw a ragged breath, her other hand was at his throat, not choking, but holding him in place with an immovable force. He was pinned utterly and completely. His feet scrambled against the floor, finding no purchase. His free hand beat against her arm, but it was like punching marble. She did not flinch. Her glowing crimson eyes held his, and in their depths, he saw no anger, no hatred, only a deep, timeless hunger and a flicker of cold assessment. The roles were now perfectly, horrifyingly reversed. Every predatory instinct he had ever possessed shriveled and died, replaced by the primal, screaming terror of the hunted. He was no longer a man, he was meat, he was a resource. The fantasy of control he had nurtured was a pathetic delusion, shattered by the unyielding strength of the creature before him. The hunter had been run to ground, and the kill was moments away. There was no ceremony, no final gloating speech. It was only the inevitable. Seraphine's head tilted, her dark hair brushing against Leo's cheek like a lover's caress. He could only watch, paralyzed, as her lips parted and the full, horrifying length of her fangs was revealed. A whimper, the last sound of the man he had been, escaped his throat. Then she struck. It was not a savage tear, but a precise, piercing motion. The pain was not the blunt agony of a wound he had imagined inflicting with a knife. It was a sharp, shocking cold that radiated from his neck through his entire body, followed by a terrifying, intimate pull. His life was not spilling out. It was being drawn from him, siphoned with a dreadful, rhythmic efficiency. His vision began to tunnel, the edges fading to an encroaching gray. The cold feeling spread, a glacial numbness that stilled his frantic struggles. He could feel the strength leaving his limbs, the warmth fleeing his core, all of it flowing into her. The coppery scent of his own blood filled the air, a perfume for this dark sacrament. He saw in his dimming sight a single perfect drop of crimson escape the corner of her mouth and trace a path down her alabaster chin, a stark and beautiful contrast. In that moment, the final veil was lifted. He saw her not as a monster, but as an apex organism, a force of nature as inevitable as a winter frost. His violent, petty ambitions were laid bare against the stark reality of her ancient physical need. This was the truth revealed in crimson. His purpose was not to hunt, but to nourish. His life, his hot blood, was the currency of her existence, and his account was being closed. The world dissolved into a cold, silent, and final dark. Consciousness returned to Leo not as a gentle dawn, but as a sudden, brutal plunge into icy water. He gasped, but the air was thin and carried no warmth. He was lying on the cold stone floor, his body a hollow, aching shell. The memory of the feeding was a raw psychic wound, the sensation of his life being drained away still echoing in his numb limbs. He was alive, but he felt siphoned, empty. Serafina stood over him, her form backlit by the brazier's blue flame. The drop of his blood still marred her perfect chin. Her eyes, however, had lost their infernal glow, replaced by a calm, ancient weariness. Her voice, when it came, was not a hiss, but a low, resonant tone that vibrated in the very marrow of his bones. She spoke not of sparing him, but of offering a choice. A true death, here on the cold stone, his body joining the fertilizer of the cemetery above. Or a transformation. A different kind of life, bound to the night, bound to her. It was an ancient bargain, one she had offered to a select few over the centuries, those with a spark of ambition, a will to survive, even if it was a predatory one. She had tasted his nature and his blood, the violence, the cunning, the hunger for power. These were traits, she explained, that could be refined. Wasted in a mortal life, potent in an immortal one. The choice was a different kind of predation. It was not a promise of salvation, but a demand for a deeper sacrifice. He could die as the man he was, a failed predator, or he could live as something else entirely. He would have to surrender his humanity, his son, his very soul, to the very creature who had just taken his lifeblood. The hunter was being offered not mercy, but recruitment. The price was everything he had ever been. A choice hung in the balance, suspended between the finality of the grave and the terror of eternity. Leo, his humanity already bleeding out onto the stone, made his decision not with words, but with a single, desperate nod. The will to live, even as a monster, was the last flickering flame in the hollowed-out cavern of his self. Seraphine's acceptance was another bite, not to drain, but to infect. Her own ancient blood, a dark, viscous poison that was also a seed of life, flowed into his veins. It was not a gentle transition, it was an invasion. Fire and ice warred within him. His body arched off the cold floor as his cells were unmade and remade. His bones felt like they were splintering, his muscles tearing and knitting back together with agonizing precision. Visions, not his own, flooded his mind, centuries of moonlight. The taste of 1,000 different heartbeats, the crushing weight of endless nights. He screamed, but the sound was stolen by the convulsions racking his frame. Blood, both his and something darker, seeped from his pores, painting him in a grotesque baptism. The long night was not a passage of time, but an epoch of agony. He died 1,000 deaths, each one a shedding of his mortal coil. The man who had preyed on the weak was being ruthlessly dismantled, his very soul scoured by a pain so absolute it became a new kind of consciousness. He was a canvas upon which a new, terrifying existence was being painted in strokes of blood and shadow. The artist was the dawn that would never come for him again. The agony did not subside so much as it transformed, crystallizing into a new state of being. Leo opened his eyes. The crypt, once a chamber of shadows and fear, was now laid bare to him in hyper-real detail. He could see the individual grains in the stone, trace the paths of ancient moss, hear the skittering of insects deep within the earth. The world was louder, sharper, overwhelmingly vivid. And the scent that dominated everything, thrumming just beneath the smell of dust and decay, was the rich, metallic perfume of blood. He could smell the residue of his own on the floor. The ancient stains soaked into the stone and the potent, slow-circulating life essence of the feral creatures watching from the shadows. He looked at his own hands. The skin was pale, almost translucent, and beneath it, he could sense the new, sluggish power in his veins, a dark and patient strength that made his previous mortal vigor seem like a feeble tremor. The hunger that now awoke within him was a yawning chasm, but it was a refined, specific hunger. It was not for violence, not for domination for its own sake. It was a pure, primal need for the vital essence that sustained this new existence. His gaze lifted and found Serafina. He no longer saw a victim or a monster, he saw a sovereign. He saw the source of the blood that now flowed in his own veins, the architect of his transformation. The fear was gone, replaced by a staggering, humbling comprehension. His petty human predation had been a blind, clumsy thing. This existence in the shadows, this ancient dance with life and death, was a true hunt. It had rules, a hierarchy, a terrible and beautiful purpose. He had not been spared. He had been promoted from prey to initiate. The understanding was not a comfort, but a fundamental rewriting of his soul. He was a newborn predator, and she was his creator. Leo rose to his feet, his movements no longer clumsy and human, but imbued with a silent, predatory grace that mirrored Seraphine's own. The cowering, broken man was gone, shed like a skin during the long night of his transformation. He stood before her, not as an equal that would take centuries, but as something acknowledged, a fledgling, but one with potential she had tasted in his ruthless ambition. Serafina offered a hand, not in help, but in presentation. Her palm was upturned, and resting in it was a single-aged key, blackened with time. It was not the key to a door, but to a purpose. Go a silent invitation to the endless night, to the hunt that was no longer about mere survival, but about the stewardship of the dark. He took it. The cold metal felt like a part of him already. His gaze met hers, and for the first time, there was no fear, no desperation, only a chilling understanding. The human hunter was dead. In his place stood a creature of the night, his violent nature not erased, but honed and given a new direction. He would no longer prey on the weak in alleys. He would be the shadow that culled the true monsters of the world, the silent justice that fed the ancient cycle. Together they ascended from the crypt, the groaning iron gates swinging open for them both. The creatures in the shadows bowed their heads as they passed, not just to her, but to him. The rain had stopped, and the moon, their sun, cast a silver light upon the gravestones. Serafina looked at the city sprawling below, a hunting ground of a different scale. She was no longer alone in her vigil. The man who had thought her easy prey now stood by her side, his hunger now a tool, his violence now a weapon in her eternal war. He was not prey. He was partner. And the night awaited them.